Once upon a time in WWE, there was a juggernaut that made an impact on 3 generations of fans. During his career, he was King Mabel, a royal behemoth, but also the world's largest love machine Viscera, or even Big Daddy V, a larger-than-life monster, and he truly was one of a kind. It's an honor to present to you on the Wrestling Paradise, our new series, where you will learn everything about the tragical destiny of Nelson Frazier Jr., the amazing man behind all of those characters, and you may very well be surprised. In the previous episode, that you should absolutely watch, we saw how, from his return to the Federation in 2004, Nelson Frazier Jr. ended up embodying a memorable character, the world's largest love machine, which enabled him to have great storylines with Lilian, Garcia and Trish Stratus, and which was perfect for him considering how he was in real life. But that, in the spring of 2007, after some random months in the mid-card of the shows, the company's draft seemed to be a good opportunity to once again revive his career. In this final episode, you will discover how he became a character who made an impact on another generation of fans, Big Daddy V. You will learn, among many other things, if he managed to finally have a real championship reign in this new role, but also the meaning that these impressive tattoos have for him, the beautiful relationship he had with his manager Matt Striker, and you will never guess what he wanted to do to his colleague Rainy Dupree when they were wrestling in Japan. And finally, you will know the final heartbreaking words he said when he died in his wife's arms in February 2014. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the tragical destiny of Big Daddy V, a larger-than-life monster. Here we go. In June 2007, Nelson Frazier Jr. was in a situation that didn't really give a lot of reasons to be optimistic. About 2 years earlier, after an already quite rich history in the Federation, he had been totally revived when he became the world's largest love machine. But now, despite an entertaining gimmick, he was going nowhere, and unfortunately he seemed to be heading for what would already be his 3rd departure from Vince McMahon's company. Nevertheless, an event is coming, and there couldn't be a better timing for it since it will make a deep impact on Nelson's career: the yearly draft of the Federation. In this kind of transfer window for the superstars that year, the draft picks that we could essentially remember would be those of Bobby Lashley and Mr. Kennedy, who were drafted to Monday Night Raw, and those of the Great Khali and Ric Flair to Smackdown, but there is another one that will be quite unnoticed. The one of Viscera, which was the name of Nelson's character at that time, to ECW. So at first we could say this is without the shadow of a doubt a demotion, a real step backwards for the Juggernaut, since this is the 3rd weekly show of the company behind Raw and Smackdown. It was more or less used as a training center to prepare the talents for the main roster, while trying to keep the original extreme identity of ECW, which was still the reputation of this federation for years, but that's another story. Personally, I don't see this transfer as a demotion, but rather as a chance for Nelson to start from scratch, and why not become the top guy of this show, its household name. And then, as you can imagine, this kind of situation is the perfect opportunity to completely change your character, perhaps to make the fans forget a not-so-glorious past. And that's exactly what will happen with Nelson, who will go from his funny love machine gimmick to a monster character who destroys everything in his path. Hold on tight. Big Daddy V. At that moment, Nelson says that it was Vince McMahon himself who wanted to totally transform him. For the record, it was even Vince who had the idea of this name. As a matter of fact, the boss wanted that. In terms of hairstyle, he let go of that blonde mohawk he had for several years and let his hair grow, returning to its natural color. Also to no longer put on the white lenses either, which must have relieved Nelson considering how hard it was to put them on for him. As for the outfit, Vince basically wanted the character of Big Daddy V to just wear a trunk and boots, a traditional wrestler's look in a way, but Nelson didn't want to. For several weeks they argued a little about it until they finally found this compromise of this outfit with some kind of suspenders that still show a large part of his body. When we see him with this look, we can already tell ourselves 2 things. The first one is that he is obviously impressive, that we become even more aware than before of his tremendous body, which we rarely see in pro wrestling. The second one is that he has huge tattoos, and about that he says he had them done when he was still the world's largest love machine. It was particularly painful, but he was very keen on it because it was something spiritual. They had a real meaning for him. As he says, it's the sun and the crescent moon with the North Star. Just to make it simple, it's a sign of my spirituality and my belief in our universe. I'll leave it at that. In any case, he is now Big Daddy V, and after having reinvented himself once again, it was time for him to kick some butt at ECW, and as you will see, his first months were quite amazing. So make sure to stay until the end of our video to see how the following months went and everything that happened in his life before his tragic demise in February 2014. Everything will start on July 10th, 2007, in the opener of the show, during the classroom segment of Matt Striker, the one who had also been a teacher in real life. He was trying to educate the terrifying and worm-eating character of the Boogeyman, and at that moment, all of a sudden, we will see a behemoth arrive. Look at this juggernaut, look at how impressive he is. As you will have understood, this is Big Daddy V, and he was going to partner with Matt Striker, who was becoming his manager. Personally, I am a big fan of the new theme song he had from that day on, which was called Calling All Cars, in which we heard a police officer warn his colleagues in the other cars about an uncontrollable monster who was coming, which I think was great. At that moment, he will destroy the Boogeyman by throwing him violently through the class board, which was really impressive. We must be sufficiently aware that the Boogeyman was a scary character who had never been victimized like that before. He was legit and terrifying. And Big Daddy V really annihilated him without any difficulty, and by the way, behind the scenes, Big Daddy V and the Boogeyman are even friends. But in the ring, on July 10th, 2007, he absolutely killed him, and I think it was awesome when he was banging his chest and screaming, which made him look even more like a monster and an animal. We can say that Big Daddy V was the King Kong of the Federation. After that, he will destroy several local wrestlers for a few weeks, always in a very dominant fashion with, among others, a big Samoan drop, in the idea of getting momentum and building maximum credibility, which would make him a perfect contender for the ECW title. He was also doing a V gesture with his fingers, which is really going to become his gimmick, and I think it was great, because it was an easy gesture to do that fans could remember, and also because it could be a nod to another big man who made an impact in the past, Vader. During the summer of 2007, on August 14th, one of the first big highlights of Big Daddy V was his dominant victory against the Chicago Kid, CM Punk, whom he will meet again a few weeks later, as you will see. In this clash, where he was once again incredibly powerful, he had the opportunity to show all his intensity. Take a look at those extremely serious eyes, just like a predator that is ready to attack its prey. Honestly, he is one of the most bestial wrestlers I have ever seen in terms of acting. I also find that he does something we don't see often. He sometimes screams during his moves, which makes them look even more impactful. I was also impressed by the acrobatic kick he does on Punk, a particularly remarkable move for his size, and that he has done throughout his whole career. Can you imagine a 500-pound colossus throwing himself in the air in that manner? And what I preferred above all in this match is simply its finish, which is also absolutely astonishing. Indeed, while CM Punk was standing on the ropes and already in a bad state, Big Daddy V arrived on him at full speed to hit him violently and brutally throw him outside the ring. This moment when he comes at the Chicago Kid really reminds me of a train, an unstoppable force, and I think it was a creative way to make the Juggernaut look very strong without pinning Punk, since the match will end with the Mastodon's victory thanks to a countout. I also think that having a manager, in this case Matt Striker, helped Big Daddy V, just like Paul Heyman with Brock Lesnar, since we had the impression he was an untamable beast who obeyed only its master, and Striker could also, by his behavior or the phrases he said, make Big Daddy V seem even stronger. At that moment, it is interesting to mention that a real friendship was born between the two men. As Matt Striker says, I got to know the man behind Big Daddy V, that he never really showed a lot of people, because in the airport he had to be the spectacle, he knew you were looking at him. But in the hotel room, he could just be Nelson. He was a sweet, sweet man. I'm walking through the airport with him. There's actually a total calm over me, in a selfish way, cause I know no one's gonna bother me. But then I become. And this is funny, because when you think of the size difference, you're talking about a man that was 6'7" and 400 pounds. I would feel that I almost had to be his protector at times. You can see when someone's gonna come over with their phone ready to ask a question. If I knew he wasn't in a good mood or something, instead of walking on his right side, I'd walk on his left side so I could block that person and then say, oh, he's not feeling well, or whatever it is. Anyway, it's nice to see that they became friends backstage at that time, and we notice once again that all the people who knew Nelson Frazier Jr. are always praising him. On August 21st, 2007, he will get a significant victory against the ECW legend, Tommy Dreamer, in an Extreme Rules match in not even 3 minutes. Something that I find mind-blowing is to think this dominant creature in the ring is the same human being who embodied a hilarious sex addict not so long ago, and it is really to his credit that he is totally comfortable and believable in these completely opposite registers. I was also a fan of the moment when he takes a trash can shot in the head, but he doesn't even flinch and he screams, which really made him very intimidating and gave him an aura of invincibility. We were also able to feel this aura again during Big Daddy V's match against the Boogeyman on September 18, 2007, still at ECW. Whereas the Boogeyman is supposed to be a very intimidating character, he completely humiliated him in what is perhaps his most memorable victory there. You look at the impact of that chop, which he even does with his V sign, something that also gives it a little originality. Once again, I think his way of hitting the opponent as if he were an immovable object against which we can only bump and fall to the ground makes him extremely impressive. We must appreciate his intensity, his extraordinary physique, his bestiality. We even see him grabbing the Boogeyman's skull, while we can imagine that other superstars would have been disgusted or terrified to do it. We can really say that Big Daddy V was a creature, and no one seemed to be capable of stopping him. So, with all of this momentum, Big Daddy V seemed destined to get a shot at the ECW title. That would probably be the greatest achievement of his singles career at that moment, since, in his pro wrestling years, his track record wasn't very full. With that King of the Ring victory 12 years earlier, and the hardcore title in 2000 for a few minutes, which was unworthy of the larger-than-life performer he was, and who deserved a real reign in my opinion. Was he finally going to have this major title and this single reign that had been denied to him for years? We were going to get the answer at the No Mercy pay-per-view on October 7th, 2007. On that day, he faced the ECW champion, CM Punk, who was also in his hometown since the event was taking place in Chicago. For Big Daddy V, it was great because we typically had a David versus Goliath style scenario, which was from the beginning of his career the kind of confrontation he preferred to have. And if we take a step back, it was still a very symbolic matchup. Indeed, we had on the one hand a big man, a tremendous old school monster heel, who would have been a perfect nemesis for Hulk Hogan, for example. And on the other hand, a more modern guy, straight out of the independent circuit, who created a lot of buzz on the internet. Knowing Vince McMahon's love for big men, we could have thought that Big Daddy V was going to have his big moment. And yet, the Colossus performance will be impressive with, among other things, that moment when he was lying with all his weight on Punk in a move that could recall the Viscera he was doing before. There was also that moment when he screams the referee to move like a wild beast. But unfortunately, there will be what can be called some lazy booking with a rather quick disqualification caused by the interference of Matt Striker, which guarantees the Chicago Kid to keep his belt. However, he will still get destroyed, to the point of ending up in tatters, coughing up blood. So, personally, I consider this to be a booking that makes no sense, since the so-called champion gets out of this looking weak, and we no longer have the impression that he is the real champion. On that day, we had a perfect illustration of this obsession of protecting everyone with a lazy and frustrating finish, and it's such a shame. Big Daddy V himself said that he regrets not having won the title in this rivalry with CM Punk, especially since, on television, he won't have another opportunity to win it. Can you only imagine Big Daddy V having a reign of terror for several months and possibly facing a believable babyface at WrestleMania in what could have been a David versus Goliath scenario at the grandest stage of them all? Anyway, it feels like a waste, and in 2007, a year when he also lost his father unfortunately in his personal life, Big Daddy V won't have any important stuff at ECW except two amazing matchups. In particular, one that can be described as a real dream match. Indeed, on October 30th, 2007, there will be a Monster Mash Battle Royale with a mind-blowing casting. Hang in there. Kane, Big Daddy V, Mark Henry, and the Great Khali. So for sure it's a match that must have given nightmares to Dave Meltzer, for example, and obviously we didn't have a very technical or high-flying match there. But on the other hand, what a match-up straight out of another dimension. Moreover, during the show we had vignettes that presented each of the actors as a powerful monster, which I think was excellent. We really had the impression that we were going to live the pro wrestling equivalent of Godzilla versus King Kong, for example, which is rare. I was disappointed that the match only lasted a few minutes and Big Daddy V was quickly eliminated by Kane for a final victory of Mark Henry, and we can imagine that the company was afraid these heavyweights would be boring for an audience that was more and more getting used to non-stop action and high-flying spots. The other incredible matchup happened at the Armageddon show to end the year 2007, where Big Daddy V formed a team with Mark Henry to face Kane and CM Punk. It was a good match of which I personally remember the violent chop of Big Daddy V on Punk's chest. That moment when he lifts him above him in a superhuman act, and especially a beautiful finish where he catches Punk in the air to give him a fatal Samoan drop, which would have been a perfect finish for their No Mercy match a few weeks before. After that, he will be the first to move from ECW to Smackdown even before the two shows have set up their partnership, and oddly enough, while we could have imagined Big Daddy V staying there longer and possibly starting to go for the title again, he will now go to the blue brand and start a rivalry with The Undertaker for a few weeks. So it's true that, with hindsight, we can tell ourselves there was a real story between the two men, that they had already faced each other in 1995 when the dead man was injured by King Mabel, and that they had been together in the Ministry of Darkness during the Attitude Era. But it is still true that this transfer and this rivalry came a little out of nowhere at the beginning of 2008. On the other hand, I must say it was when he faced The Undertaker on Smackdown in January that I saw Big Daddy V for the first time, and I really thought he was very impressive. I was speechless in front of my television when I saw this freak. Being astonished in front of such a larger-than-life character is pro wrestling just how I like it. Look how tremendous he is when he is filmed from a low camera angle. Moreover, in one of his matches against The Undertaker at the beginning of 2008, he will be the victim of the dead man's triangle choke, which will end up being called the Hell's Gate, a move that I found super impressive in which Taker even made his opponents spit blood. On February 1st, 2008, Big Daddy V will once again be in the ring against The Undertaker, who will this time be accompanied by Kane for a Brothers of Destruction reunion, while the Colossus will team up with another monster, who was also powerful, Mark Henry. It should be noted that this match was the main event of Smackdown, which perhaps gave Nelson more exposure than ever since we are still talking about a weekly show that attracted almost 3 million viewers at that time. I must say that this heavyweight match still amazes me to this day, especially because they are 4 real characters with imposing physiques. Look at this completely crazy visual where the Brothers of Destruction do a double chokeslam on Big Daddy V. Some might say this match is too slow and doesn't have any spot, but that would be completely missing the real spectacle. Being able to admire 4 performers with huge identity and charisma executing impactful moves. And besides the final triangle choke that Mark Henry suffered at the hands of The Undertaker was amazing. On a personal note, this is my favorite version of the Phenom, and I think Big Daddy V and him looked great together. There was a real chemistry visually, and we can say that in 2008, when we were at the beginning of the road to WrestleMania 24. The juggernaut was mainly used to keep the dead man busy and to put him over. We can point out that, behind the scenes, Big Daddy V had a lot of respect for The Undertaker, whom he had known for 13 years at that time, and he even said about him, back when WCW was a rival, I think that if The Undertaker would have left the WWE, WCW would have won. A really powerful quote, which shows all his admiration for the Phenom. And for the record, Big Daddy V is also friends with Mick Foley, and he was even the favorite wrestler of the latter's children. In the end, Big Daddy V's highlight in this period, at SmackDown in the beginning of 2008, will be his participation in the Elimination Chamber match at No Way Out to determine the heavyweight title challenger for WrestleMania. And he faced, check this out, the great Khali, Batista, MVP, Finlay, and The Undertaker. Despite his fairly quick elimination after taking a DDT from Taker on the steel, we can say this is one of the most prestigious matches in which Big Daddy V has participated, in the middle of the road to WrestleMania. And it's true that when I look at his character and his chemistry with his opponents, I regret that he didn't face a top babyface of the company at that time in this version, for example, Jeff Hardy. And besides, the Juggernaut himself said it was one of his dreams to have a singles match against Jeff Hardy. But unfortunately, it will never happen. Indeed, on March 11, 2008, at ECW, he will have what will remain the last match of his life in the Federation, which seems unbelievable in hindsight because he had just been rebooted again recently and he was only 37 at that time. In a battle to qualify for the Money in the Bank match that will take place at WrestleMania 24, he will face CM Punk. So at that moment, let me tell you this, can you only visualize Big Daddy V climbing to the top of the ladder at the showcase of the Immortals and becoming, if we can call him like that, Big Daddy in the Bank? It would have been amazing, but in the end he will lose this clash after a countout. Apparently, there were no problems with the officials, since he says he was supposed to participate in the Battle Royale at WrestleMania 24, and that he would have been against Kane at the end. According to him, he was even going to have a big push just after that. So the big question we're asking ourselves is, why did his story with the Federation end? For what reason did none of this happen? The reasons and circumstances are not very clear. On the one hand, in the pro wrestling media, whose information must of course not be considered as gospel, we could read that officials wanted Big Daddy V to lose weight. Apparently, he was removed from television in March 2008 to punish him, until he ended up being fired in August, which seems a bit too much. Especially since this is not what the main actor of the story says at all. Indeed, he himself said he was never asked to lose weight, and that the only reason he was absent was because he had pneumonia. According to him, he and the company decided by mutual agreement that he needed to take some time to recover, especially since his wife was begging him to go see a doctor. But in the end, according to Nelson, it was because of the doctor that he was fired by the company, because he allegedly made certain comments about his health that the company could not legally ignore, and which somehow forced the Federation to fire him. Of course, this is his version. But anyway, the past has shown us that he always had a good relationship with the company, so this story makes sense. The fact of the matter is that in August 2008, Nelson was fired for the third time in his life by the Federation, and this time he will never come back. He said that when the Federation let him go, his friend Matt Striker called him, and it was a call that he remembered more than the other ones because he felt that Striker was really sad about his dismissal. Anyway, from there he will star in 2 movies. First, Wrong Side of Town in 2010, in which there were also Rob Van Dam and Batista. Then The Legend of Awesomest Maximus in 2011, a parody of the movie 300. And it's true that given his tremendous physique, we could have imagined him having a career in cinema, but finally, until 2013, he will continue to wrestle, but in the indies. During these years, what can be mentioned is the runs he had at the NWA in 2008, at Pro Wrestling Stream in 2009 in Canada, at All Japan Pro Wrestling between March 2010 and December 2011 in Japan, where he will even be tag team champion with the Voodoo Murders faction, where he will meet his friend Charlie Haas again. The latter says about Nelson, "He taught me so much and he was such a great guy. We had a good little run there and I was happy to be with him." In Japan, Nelson was also true to his old Love Machine character, since one night, when he had been drinking a lot with his colleague Rene Dupré, who was also wrestling there, he wanted to teabag him. A funny story that the Canadian laughs about today. Nelson will also wrestle in Austria in October 2012 at the European Wrestling Association. And it is in October 2013 that he will have the last match of his life, against Rene Dupré precisely, in Qatar, in what was the launch of the Qatar Pro Wrestling promotion at the time in which Bobby Lashley had also participated. So at that moment, you might wonder why this was the last match of his life. Unfortunately, on February 18, 2014, when he had just turned 43, Nelson Frazier passed away. His wife says he had lost 100 pounds in the last months before his death by improving his diet, but unfortunately it was too late. The one who was by Nelson's side at the time when they were part of the Men on a Mission, Oscar, said, "Big Daddy V was getting out of his bathtub and he was feeling really hot. His wife laid him down and got him a cold glass of water and I believe a cold compress. Minutes later, he started bleeding from the mouth and he suffered from a heart attack. He literally died in his wife's arms. His last words were, while looking at his wife Cassandra, 'I love you very much. She is an extraordinary woman.'" In the following months, Nelson's wife will sue the Federation, claiming that he died because of the long-term effects of the physical damage he had in the ring, that he had a lot of headaches and memory loss since he left the company. Even if she attacked them on her Facebook account, Nelson's wife will eventually apologize, saying that she had acted under the influence of grief and she will receive $10,000 from the company. His former colleagues will pay tribute to Nelson and his wife will put his ashes in necklaces that she will give to family and friends. Finally, his former partners from the Men on a Mission, with whom it all started more than 20 years ago, will be the ones with the most emotional stories about their last moments with Nelson. Oscar, who had left the team being upset because he wanted them to remain baby faces, said, "My favorite moment was a phone call a few weeks before he died. We had one of the most heartfelt chats over the phone. He cried, I cried, and that never happened in the history of us being together. And that's what it really took to really let the outpouring of love from our hearts from each other come out, and that was my favorite moment. As for Mo, the one Nelson met at wrestling school, who was his best friend for several years before their relationship was broken by Mo's jealousy when Nelson became King Mabel, they ended up talking again, and he said, the one thing that Nelson talked about more than anything in the weeks before he passed, he wanted to be in the Hall of Fame. He felt like looking at the way the business is now, and he felt like in his heart of hearts, Men on a Mission had done enough and we had brought so much to the business, because how many acts have spawned off of just the Men on a Mission characters? He really felt like we should be in the Hall of Fame. He would tell me all the time, man, if you've got anything bad to say about the Federation, anything, just please man, don't say it. Keep it to yourself. Don't say it. We deserve the Hall of Fame. After more than 20 years in the pro wrestling business, whether it was with Mo and Oscar in the Men on a Mission, as King Mabel, Viscera, the world's largest love machine, or as Big Daddy V, Nelson Frazier Jr., this larger-than-life juggernaut will have managed something that is rare, to make an impact on 3 generations of wrestling fans. And this is how our series about the man who was a showman, a king, the henchman of a dark faction, a sex addict and a behemoth ends, this performer who we knew under the names of Mabel, Viscera and Big Daddy V, but who, for his loved ones, was Nelson, a giant who was loved by everybody. Throughout this very rich career, we could see that he was capable of dancing, but also of killing his opponents, of being terrifying and funny, and not many superstars can brag about having had so many strings to their bow. And after being able to dive into his amazing story, I have a debate for you. Do you think that Nelson Frazier Jr. deserves to be inducted into the Hall of Fame? We invite you to come and give your opinion. It will be interesting to talk about it together in the comments and to share our ideas. We can say that this character really was larger than life. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay on the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?